when a child is killed in Gaza, it's because somebody made a decision that this killing was worth it to hit another target. And there are internal regulations that the army has created that regulate this. Any statements that Israel, during the first 5 days, so up until October 11th and October 12th, has bombed 1,329 power targets. The military said also by speaking to intelligence sources who have told me that now all of the previous restrictions that were already permissive into harming civilians have been dramatically loosened. For example, one source spoke about how you get sort of this approximation of where a target is, and it's not pinpointed. And yet soldiers will still strike it, knowingly killing families and civilians to save time.
So guys, welcome to yet another video. So this is the statement that got my eyes, that I said that this deserves another reaction. You know, in this channel we always stand up for truth, we always stand up for free speech, and this is why we do what we do. This statement really got my attention. That in other words, the civilian devastation that is happening right now in Gaza, the result of a war policy that has very loose interpretation of what a military target is. This targeting of private homes and residences to kill alleged combatants means that when a child is killed in Gaza, it's because somebody made a decision it was worth it. Just turned the Israeli military into a mass assassination factory. The total disregard for Palestinian civil life. Continues Abraham, so we are quoting Abraham, who also notes that as an Israeli journalist, his reporting is still subject to military censors. So after that point, just that to see this video, I've not seen this video before. It was released on the 1st of December 2023. So let's get right into it. We're trying to find out the truth, what's happening in Gaza, in this war, Israel versus the Hamas or Gaza. So we are trying to interpret this. So you can also comment down in the comments section below. Let us talk, let us share, let us get the truth out there.
Israel's resumed airstrikes on Gaza after a week-long truce ended. The strikes have reportedly killed at least 70 Palestinians. Israel's dropping leaflets ordering Palestinians in Khan Yunis, the largest city in southern Gaza, to head further south toward Rafah. Since the October 7th Hamas attack, the Israeli bombardment has killed over 15,000 Palestinians, including 6,100 children.
Whoa, numbers never lie. 6,000 children, 1,500 Palestinians. And threats are still more intense even after the ceasefire. So there was no deal, in short. No deal, no nothing. Get out. Oh my.
The Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has described the resumption of attacks as very troubling.
Yeah,
the resumption of hostilities in Gaza is catastrophic.
Yeah.
We urge all parties and states with influence over them to redouble efforts immediately to ensure a ceasefire on humanitarian and human rights grounds. Recent comments by Israeli political and military leaders indicating that they are planning to expand and intensify the military offensive are very troubling.
That's positive. Yeah, you call it what it is. I thought she would sugarcoat and be like all parties, but at least has pointed out that on this side, the Israeli side, some of the comments, they are really troubling. They are just adding more oil into the fire.
Talks are reportedly continuing for a new truce and the release of more captives. Israel says it believes Hamas still holds 137 hostages kidnapped during the October 7th attacks. We turn now to look at a stunning new expose on how Israel's using artificial intelligence to draw up targets and how Israel's loosened its constraints on attacks that could kill civilians. One former intelligence officer.
Remember, this could be anybody. this could happen to anybody. That was someone's home. All in the belief that you could be holding hostages.
Says Israel's developed a, quote, mass assassination factory. In one case, sources said the Israeli military approved an assassination strike on a single Hamas commander, despite knowing the strike could kill hundreds of Palestinian civilians. Another source told 972 magazine, quote, nothing happens by accident. When a 3-year-old girl is killed in a home in Gaza, it's because someone in the army decided it wasn't a big deal for her to be killed, that it was a price worth paying in order to hit another target. Everything is intentional. We know exactly how much collateral damage there is in every move, unquote. 972 also reports the Israeli military knowingly attacked civilian targets, including apartment complexes, universities, and banks, in an effort to exert, quote, civil pressure on Hamas. We're joined in Jerusalem by the Israeli investigative reporter Yuval Abraham. His latest report for 972 magazine and Local Call is headlined, A Mass Assassination Factory Inside Israel's Calculated Bombing of Gaza. Yuval, thanks for joining us again from Jerusalem.
Before we go to the interview, my question is, are these people ever going to rebuild this? These are people's home. Destruction formidable. And I believe the numbers are higher. This is the type of destruction that then the numbers must be higher.
Jerusalem. If you can talk about who your sources are and what exactly they're using, the Israeli military is using AI for. Explain this idea of a mass assassination factory.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll start by saying, Amy, that you know, there are some things that I can say and other things that I cannot say. You know, we as Israeli journalists are subjected to the military censor. So everything that I have published had to be vetted by the military. Also, my knowledge is partial. So I've spoken to 7 Israeli intelligence officers, some of them current, some of them former intelligence officers. All of them took part in wars against Gaza, in bombing campaigns, whether right now or in 2021, 2022, and 2014. And the use of artificial intelligence is an increasing trend that
So if the information is about to be vetted, then how can we believe it? How true is it? How true? Tell us. How viable is it? Okay, let's listen on.
that the army is adopting to mark targets in Gaza. And I think a good year to look at, to understand its beginning with relation to Gaza is 2019, when the Chief of Staff, Aviv Kochavi, introduced this new division in the military called the Targets Division. And its idea was to bring together hundreds of soldiers and basically start to develop these AI algorithms and automated software to accelerate the target creation for strikes with life and death consequences in Gaza. And you know, a source that actually took part in this division center said that they were being judged not by the quality of the targets that they were producing, but by the quantity. That the idea here was that if you want to create a certain shock effect, if you are fighting against a guerrilla group like Hezbollah in Lebanon and or Hamas in Gaza, this is the source saying, then, sorry, can you hear me?
I hear you perfectly.
Right, so the source said that this shock effect is the way Israel views its war tactic against these organizations, and part of that is trying to accelerate the creation of targets. Now, in 2014...
So it's about numbers. It's not about quality. The who's and who. You might be targeting one person. That's the interpretation. But to be targeting one person, in the middle of 50 people, better eliminate all. That's how they set.
which was the previous biggest Israeli assault on Gaza. According to sources that I've spoken with, the Israeli military ran out of targets after roughly 3 weeks. And that operation lasted for 50 days. And so...
Ryan, having an...
Sources have described a sense that in previous operations that the military just runs out of targets to bomb, and alongside that there is some political pressure or some need to continue the war, to create a victory image for the Israeli public, to work.
So you come into a war, and just 3 days, after just 3 days, back new target. So now it's all politics. So that means from October 7th to date, it has been plain politics. I said, how true is this information since he himself said that he has been vetted? But anyway, at the end of the day, the world is a global stage.
To apply more pressure. And I think this increasing use of artificial intelligence, this acceleration of target creation, in part is a response to that problem, to running out of targets. And what we know now from sources is that target production using these programs, one of them is called...
Do you think that this is a good title for the video? Title runs out of targets. So this is an AI war. This is an AI war. Have you guys just realized that this is an AI war? AI has already been used. You might be a target today and you don't.
the gospel, and according to sources, it does facilitate this mass assassination factory that I can get into in a moment. But the rate of creating the targets is now faster than the rate that Israel is able to bomb the targets. And in this targets division, according to the army's sources, already 12,000 targets were created during this war in this targets division, using these artificial intelligence tools, which is too much, two times as many targets as were bombed in the entirety of the 2014 war, which lasted for 51 days.
Have you just heard what they said? You can generate targets faster than you can actually bomb them. And in this war, they have 12,000 targets, which is 10 times more than the 2014 war.
Civilian targets, including private homes, public buildings, infrastructure, are referred to as power targets?
Power targets.
Yes. So power targets is a concept that was developed according to intelligence sources in the military first in 2014. And the military defines power targets as residential high-rise buildings. So they have 8 floors, 12 floors, 14 floors. And the official military's claim is that in each of these buildings there is a military target that merits, that legitimizes bombing down the entire building. However, according to 3 sources in Israeli intelligence that I've spoken with, who have a deep knowledge of this tactic, who have been involved with bombing power targets, they say that the idea of power targets is to purposely attack buildings that have all of these civilian apartments in them in order to put pressure on Palestinian civilian society in Gaza, which is then translated to pressure on Hamas,
So
civilian
power
pressure on
targets.
Hamas. I've heard this term several times in my conversations with intelligence sources.
Remember,
now,
it's all
in
remember it's all about politics. The war ended like after 3 days. So all these other things are just shenanigans. They're just politics. That's why you name them power centers. They are ways to put pressure on the enemy to acquire power over them.
2021, Amy, the Israeli military bombed the El Jala building in Gaza, which, it caused an international uproar because this was a building that hosted the AP, AFP, and Al Jazeera media outlets. It was 1 out of 9 high-rises that were bombed in 2021. I've managed to confirm from sources within Israeli intelligence that this was in fact a power target. One source said that there was this idea that if we bomb the high-rises, it causes the civilians to feel like Hamas is not sovereign, like they have lost control. One source said that he felt this was a form of a terror tactic. Now, very importantly, the source...
So how are you the victims? Well, you're the terrorist at the same time. And then when one protects himself, you just become a crybaby. This is terror. This is unleashing terror. Clearly.
that I've spoken with have dealt with these power targets before 2023, before the current Israeli assault in Gaza. So I know less about the specifics of power targets that are currently bombed. However, we do know from official army statements that Israel, during the first 5 days, so up until October 11th and October 12th, has bombed 1,329 power targets. The military said that half of the targets that were bombed were identified as power targets in the military. Now, during these 5 days, we know, of course, that hundreds of children have been killed. We've managed to find indications of these buildings that were bombed without an evacuation protocol. And this is a very important point because according to sources that I've spoken with, in the past, the internal protocol in the military was that you can only bomb power targets, which are high-rise buildings or governmental buildings inside neighborhoods, after you've evacuated all the families from the building. This was a principle that was in place in 2021, where they bombed 9 high-rises, 9 power targets, and no civilian Palestinians were killed because they did put in place an evacuation protocol. They call, the guard in the building. It's quite horrific, and there is little missiles. But at the end of the day, the goal was to put pressure on civilians by destroying their apartments, from what I've heard from sources, and not by killing them. Now, I don't know. Again, I haven't spoken to sources that have bombed power targets in this operation, but there are clear indications that I am finding in Gaza. For example, the El Muhandisin Tower, which was bombed on top of all the families inside of it, or Babel Tower, or El Taj.
You know what, guys? Really, I've lacked words to say. So, there are policies that are made in war. Clearly, that's what I've understood. There are policies. Let us bomb this. Let us do this. Just to apply pressure.
Taj Tower, that they were bombed while the families were inside. And I think, I'm assuming, since these are high-rises, and since the military has said that it bombed over 1,000 power targets, that these were power targets. So this is a shift. The evidence suggests that there is a shift here of not only striking targets that are primarily intended to cause civilian shock or to put civilian pressure on Hamas, again, according to intelligence sources, but apparently in some of the cases, the evidence suggests that such targets have also led to the killing of families.
One thing that fascinates me with this journalist, Ahmed, I believe, is he's very careful with his words. He's very, very careful and he's very intelligent. And investigations, so he's not confirming that. So he's claiming, it's like a rat. It bites and then blows. It bites and then it blows. To have that, so that you don't feel the impact. So he's really putting it out there, but in a soft way.
I want to turn to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, speaking Thursday at a news conference in Tel Aviv.
Israel has one of the most sophisticated militaries in the world. It is capable of neutralizing the threat posed by Hamas while minimizing harm to innocent men, women, and children. And it has an obligation to do so. The way Israel defends itself matters. It's imperative that Israel act in accordance with international humanitarian law and the laws of war.
So, Yuval Abraham, if you can respond to what Blinken's saying, at the beginning after the October 7th attack, President Biden said that the support for Israel was unconditional. They could do anything they wanted. Now, clearly, with massive pushback in the United States, with protests of people all over the country and around the world, you have both Biden and Blinken stepping back and saying you have to protect civilians. One of your sources suggested that the scale of this attack, with an unprecedented number of civilian casualties in Gaza, has to do in part with the Israeli military's wish to redeem itself after the catastrophic failures of October 7th. And now you have this big New York Times expose that Israel clearly knew a year ago the blueprint for this attack. And there are other reports in Haaretz and other places that say, I think they were called the women surveillance soldiers along the Gaza border. I think they're called spotters, were repeatedly telling their supervisors in the last weeks, in the last months, We see this escalation here. It looks like Hamas is about to attack, and they would be told they'd be brought up on insubordination charges if they kept pushing this issue. Yuval.
Let's hear his response.
Yes, Amy, it's very important for
This
me to
guy's
respond
new.
to Blinken's statements. And I think I have three things that I really want to say, and I really want people to listen to them. The first is that the very real war crimes that Hamas has committed, killing people, some of them I knew, massacring people, do not justify Israeli war crimes in Gaza that are being committed. That's
Good.
number one. Number
Good.
two, this
Good.
idea that the military is doing whatever it can to keep civilians in Gaza safe, or that it is using its technology to not harm civilians in Gaza is false. It's not true. And I know this not only from looking at the catastrophic killing of so many civilians in Gaza, but also by speaking to intelligence sources who have told me that now all of the previous restrictions that were already permissive into harming civilians have been dramatically loosened. For example, one source spoke about how you get sort of this approximation of where a target is, and it's not pinpointed. And yet soldiers will still strike it, knowingly killing families and civilians to save time in getting.
Remember, it's politics now. The war ended. Now it's politics. Now it's the pressure on the enemy. So they will do it knowingly. They're saving time, or they will face insubordination charges.
A more accurate pinpointing of the target. It's very important that people understand that, and this is according to 5 sources that I've spoken with in Israeli intelligence, in all of the target fires that Israel is bombing right now, the amount of civilians that are likely to be killed is written down. So again, it's not a mistake.
So it's a planned massacre. This is a planned massacre. It's a planned war. It's a planned massacre. The outcome is known. So whether with a public outcry, whatever you say, there's nothing you're going to do about it.
As you've quoted in the beginning of the piece, in the beginning of the narration, Amy, when a child is killed in Gaza, it's because somebody made a decision that this killing was worth it to hit another target. And there are internal regulations that the army has created that regulate this. And so it's very clear to me that after October 7th, there is a total disregard for Palestinian civilian life, even when hitting targets that are either not distinctly military in nature. The third and final thing, and this goes back to the idea of a mass assassination factory.
And point to note, you're not going to see this in the mainstream. You are never going to see this in the mainstream. You are never going. Oh my. If for every child that is lost, it is planned for.
Is that there is a systematic policy, according to sources, of targeting private residential homes of Hamas or jihadi operatives when they are in these private homes, when they are in these buildings or private residencies. And
So you go down with the family. So once you suspect you look like a Hamas, look like a jihadi. My brother, the way you're talking, look like a Hamas. Go down with your family. We just suspect you. Make you one of our 12,000 targets. Off you go.
Just so you understand, I mean, what this means is that the military is knowingly dropping a bomb that weighs a ton or often more on a residential building in order to assassinate one person, knowingly killing that person's family and neighbors in the process, when according to sources, in the vast majority of cases, these buildings are not places where there is military activity that is being conducted. It is an assassination against somebody who is...
In short, if it's Palestinian, doesn't matter. I'm the motherfucker. That's the attitude that I'm getting. It's planned for. Remember, it's an AI-generated target. And it's programmed not for quality, but for quantity. Why? To send a message to the other citizens that Hamas doesn't really have a stronghold, doesn't have a presence. My brothers and sisters, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say.
Hamas or Jihad's military brigades.
It's really a sad evening. I was not ready for such news, but brace yourselves.
But they are not in a military place. One source who was particularly critical of this policy said that he thought it was like if Israel would bomb, if a Palestinian militant group would bomb the homes of Israelis, not when they are wearing their army uniform, but when they are going back home in the weekend, and essentially assassinating them through the bodies of their families or their neighbors, and then saying that they use those families as human shields. Now, I think that we've talked about these power targets and we've talked about these assassination targets, and of course, there are many different types of targets that could be considered under international law more legitimate. For example, militant cells, for example, ammo warehouses.
I want to know what your opinions are. Do you believe this? Do you believe that the Palestinians are a target of the Israeli army? That the Israeli army has planned, this is a planned massacre? Do you really believe that? Finally, let's talk in the comments below.